It's such an honor and a privilege always to work with you and to hear you talk. So, hi, I'm Caryn Frith. I'm an occupational health physician by training, and I'm guessing you can hear by my accent that I am also South African. So Charlotte and I are part of I think there are about 100 South Africans who work at the World Bank. And I've been with the World Bank for about 10 years. And really, I think, got interested in inclusion probably because of our history as a country in South Africa. It's really been, we've lost our slides, Anna, sorry. Thank you. It's really been such a fundamental part of my identity over the years to get involved, and so this has been part of my journey here. So I wanted to touch a little bit today, just reflecting on some of the things I've heard said. So I'm going to modify my presentation a little bit from what I'd originally intended, just because I've heard so much good stuff in the room. But I'm going to ask Anna to, next slide please, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the World Bank, and as Charlotte said, why it's quite so complex. So we are around, as Charlotte said, our mission is to end global poverty and enhance shared prosperity in a livable planet. And we do that, we're a development institution. We basically lend money to countries. When I say that, the countries have actually invested in us, so it's almost like a cooperative. We have 189 member countries, and of those 189 member countries, we have offices in about 150 countries, and we've got staff from more than 220 offices in more than 150 countries. Our staff are 5 generations. We have 150 spoken languages. And when we're talking about disability disclosure, and we have a similar system to Stellenbosch universities, I think, Ines, you mentioned that. We have a self-disclosure, so we call it iCount. And on our iCount system, we have about a 2.7% disclosure at the World Bank. Okay. We also looked at some other statistics. We do a staff health survey every year, or every couple of years, for example. And in the staff health survey, we had about a 5%. Disability statistics. So it's interesting, there is a little bit of a difference there, and I just really want to reflect on everyone who talked about invisible disabilities today. 80% of our disabilities identify themselves as being invisible. So I think that's just also, that conversation is such an important one. Obviously, if you look at that spread across the globe, being in so many locations, there are a lot of challenges. There are also unique opportunities. And as Charlotte said, we're on our journey with the disability inclusion strategy. I think as I talk about it, the framework is going to sound very impressive today, perhaps relative to some of the things you guys have heard. But we are also on a journey. So I don't want to give the impression that everything is perfect and shiny, but we're trying. And I think that's part of, as institutions, the responsibility we have. Anna, can I ask you to put the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a very quick highlighted slide. It's basically, as Charlotte said, our disability inclusion strategy was developed over about 3 years, in fact, with multiple voices from multiple different parts of the organization. Really a lot of thought went into the final product. And a lot of the work originated around the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy. And for those of you, if you're not familiar with the document, I would really recommend going to look at the UN document. It's freely available online. There's really some great principles in there. But basically the goal of our disability inclusion strategy is to make the World Bank Group the best place to work in development for staff with disabilities. I would argue it's the goal of, to make it the best place to work for staff, full stop, right? But that was the stated goal of our strategy. And we had 3 main pillars when we thought about it. So the one is the organizational culture, the second is inclusion, and the third was knowledge management and learning. And I'm going to ask for the next slide, please. How are we doing for time? Okay, so quickly on the organizational culture, I've heard a lot from you today about the importance of leadership, and I'm going to apologize because I realize that the typing on the slide is not correct, but the first line there is supposed to be leadership, leadership engagement, and leadership leading by example, by engagement. So that's a very, very critical part of our organizational culture and of what we've identified as essential to our inclusion strategy. The second is strategic policy and planning. So that's basically, I think we heard this earlier, you want to create a framework, right? You want to have a framework around which policies can be built. We are still working on we have a policy which relates to our disability working group. We're still working on some policies around accommodation, but we definitely have a very clear direction that we're heading in from a policy and procedure perspective. And then thirdly, and this is, I think, probably the biggest thing, is thinking about attitudes and aligning leadership, aligning staff, and aligning everyone towards accountability. And Charlotte mentioned earlier about the importance of data. And it's a difficult conversation because when you think about yourself as an individual, you don't necessarily want to be the data, part of the data, right? But if you think about your role as an individual in contributing to the greater good, it's really important that we have the data. And so that's something we spend a lot of time talking about. Next slide, please, Anna. So now you're going to see correctly positioned inclusion. So there are three important things in inclusion, obviously recruitment and talent management. We're trying very hard to move towards universal design, and I think that's something that was definitely spoken about a lot today, and I do have a slide on it, but I'll probably skip that one. And then accommodation. I think accommodations are probably a necessary evil. I think there's always going to be, on the sides of universal design, there's always going to be a little bit of a need for individualization on either side. And that's okay, right? As long as you're doing it in a way that's sensitive, that's inclusive, and that it allows people in the workplace to do their job. And obviously, when you're talking about accommodations in other settings at school or however it is. But I don't think we're ever going to be in a world where there's no accommodation needed at all. Next slide, please. Sorry, Anna. And the final thing we've been doing, and that's also something I heard a lot in the room today, was the importance of making sure that people are aware that we do training. We do celebrate the day of IDPD, which we're doing today here as well, but we also do it around the World Bank Group. We try not to just celebrate it as we said earlier, just 1 month or 1 day. It is something we do try, and we've got a lot of training programs. There are things to sort of get the message out there. So those are the three pillars that we sort of based our strategy on. I wanted to speak a tiny bit, Anna, next slide, please. Anna, next slide. Okay, I'm just going to speak. I wanted to speak a tiny bit as a physician who's very involved in disability, because I think it is unfortunate, and I do hear feedback. There's a lot of concern about the medical model, and in fact within the World Bank Group we actually made the decision to house the Accommodation Centre of Excellence within our health department. So when I say I'm part of the World Bank Group, I'm part of the team that looks after the health of staff. But the reason we did that was, there are a couple of good reasons, right? The one is medical confidentiality. So it saves you having to have a conversation with your manager about your specific situation in terms of what's the medical. So you already take it off the table that in the case of an invisible disability, you've got your manager going, oh, but does that really reach the threshold, right? So because of the complexity of being right across the globe, so many different countries, so many different understandings from a medical point of view, that was a decision to house it internally with us medically. Yeah, I'm nearly done. And I think we're frozen from a slide point of view. No, there we are. Okay, so that was just my little plug on universal design versus accommodations. Basically, obviously, universal design is proactive. I loved, Sally, I think, mentioned the Denning cycle earlier, but the Plan, Do, Check, Act. That's such a fundamental thing about systems, right? You want to think about what you're trying to do. You want to do it, you want to check it, and then you want to act on what you learned from checking it. And I think that continuous cycle of improvement is so important, and that needs to be a part of universal design. Accommodations obviously are reactive. They're responding to the individual. We have an absolute rights-based approach to the World Bank, meaning anyone can access accommodations. Obviously, we have thresholds in terms of how they work. And that's something I can talk to in a second. Anna, next slide, please. So I said this already, we're medical professionals, we maintain strict confidentiality, and we connect staff with resources. And the last slide next slide. And this is also just something I wanted to say about accommodations. I think everyone will agree, nothing is static in this world either, right? And so part of it is that iterative approach of, is this working now? Great, what can we do to make it work? You know, and just keeping that cycle going. So we very much talk about accommodations as being iterative. They may need to be interactive. Our team work with a staff member to work out what they need and try and support in that. And, you know, sometimes, and I think this is the other very, very important point that I've heard today and really will take home, you know, I mean, it's not that it wasn't something I knew before, but you know, listening to the individual and understanding their situation and their needs, that's got to be the basis of how you start an accommodation discussion, right? And so, you know what you need best. We may not be able to accommodate in the workplace necessarily. There may be realities that sometimes make that difficult. But if we can't, we may be able to look at other options that can help you be as best we can, right? And so that's also part of the interactive and iterative process. So the last slide I had was because we had in our paper when we originally put this in, we talked about what are the success metrics of a successful, you know, disability inclusion strategy. What are the success metrics of successful, you know, implementation? I'm going to leave that question hanging and say, can we discuss it as part of the panel discussion? And at that stage, I'm going to say, Anna, Charlotte, thank you so much, Anna, for sharing the slides. Charlotte, it's such a pleasure to have you with us. And just have a wonderful day, and thank you all.